Right, so beginning this next panel, the listed moderators are Don Pennant and Anessa Kozlovskoya. Unfortunately, Anessa, who's an icon in sensory motor physiology and countermeasures research, was unable to travel to the summit. And we heard in the intros from the last panel a bit about Don, who's a chemical engineer and veteran astronaut of 2 long-duration missions, I think Expedition 6 and Expedition 3031, and also flew STS-106 with a cumulative time and space of more than 369 days. So Don's an avid inventor and an innovator, an educator not only in space but in extreme environments such as Antarctica. He's also our dinner speaker tomorrow evening, so we'll hear a lot about his adventures, and I think this will be a very interesting panel. So Don, thanks very much for moderating this panel.
Well, this panel is about maximizing the use of space station with a couple of topics to get started on. One is sharing the facilities and the data. And just to plant seeds in your mind, there's proprietary work going on, and how do you make sure that international crews working on your experiments can maintain the degree of proprietary for your data. And then there's cooperative research, which is always a big word. It's basically being a team and working together as needed. And then there's utilizing crew time, how to get the maximum amount of work done without chronically fatiguing the crew. So those are kind of seeds, particularly for a medical environment like here. How do we keep the crews healthy and working and not overwork them on orbit? So keep those seeds in mind as we go through the panelists, and we'll go straight down the table and let every panelist spend a minute or two thinking. And I want to point out, just because seeds are running a little long, we have an hour between now and lunch. So keep that in mind in terms of panelists when you are talking. So let's start off. Julie, you start off with your few words.
Okay, sure. So one of the great things about the ISMS is we have the opportunity to talk about what we've done in the past, what we should do, and sometimes we get to talk about what we are doing and some things that may even surprise those of you in the audience, even if you've been around NASA for a long time. And I think today I want to share with you some of those new things, which I think you might find both quite intriguing and really important. So, as we've been looking at new missions to the moon and how those prepare us for Mars, we've had the opportunity to really go back to the first principles that were used 20 years ago when we were getting ready to use the International Space Station, and think through how do you rigorously frame the research you need to do on all these different platforms so that you do the right things so that you're ready for Mars at the right time. And many of you know that a lot of our human risks are framed in terms of the 5 hazards of human spaceflight. So we've gone back to those across ISS and the Lunar Enterprise, both Gateway and lunar surface missions, and thought about how do those missions help us simulate altered gravity for Mars? How do those help us simulate isolation and confinement on exploration missions? Distance from Earth and communication impacts, evacuation, limited evacuation. How do they model and not model deep space radiation? And how does that depend on durations? And then how can we better understand the effects of a hostile closed environment, being locked in a can with an ECLSS system for a very long period of time on the crew? And as we put all of those together, we had a great opportunity from our ISS program manager, Kirk Shireman, who said to the Human Research Program, I want you to look at everything and assume that the rules and the way we do things today are not a limiter. What could we change in our operations on the space station so that we could better address exploration needs? And so we've had about 2 years since that first question was asked to start developing and implementing really what I see as a new phase of utilization on the space station. And instead of just the phase that we had for the first 20 years of the space station, we're really focused on microgravity effects, and that's been an incredibly productive time. But now we can start looking at more integrated effects, look at some of the other hazards that maybe the space station isn't a perfect match for, but it can help us understand it. And with this invitation to change the operations of the space station, we can do some things that we could never do before. There are 4 use cases that have been accepted by the ISS program and are being implemented right now. There are some quick starts starting this year and in 2020. There are some major differences in operations, at least for periods of time, that are coming in as early as 2022 and as late as 2024 to address these use cases. And I'll just, because it's so short on time, I'll just tell you briefly what those use cases are. The first one, it makes a lot of sense to everyone, and that is going back to having systematic one-year missions. And it's great to have Alexei here and Sergey here, because they are 2 people who have actually done those kinds of long-duration missions. We really believe with modern medicine, getting systematic data where duration is your independent variable, and you have the same data on short, medium, and long-duration crews, is a significantly important use case, and that will begin as soon as commercial crew begin flying. The second use case is doing sensory motor studies of crew members that are significantly deconditioned. And we started this with our Russian colleagues, and Elena's here, one of the major collaborators, in what we called field test in the for the Soyuz landings, and we continued and have significant results from that work. The exciting thing is that now, as we have our commercial crew providers coming, we'll have Boeing landings on the desert as well. And so we've been talking with our Russian colleagues and framing it's sort of we're calling it Field Test 2 for short, but what it really is a much more substantial, much more operationally relevant understanding of, can the crew do things they might have to do in a real Mars reference mission? Can they take care of themselves if the power doesn't get connected and they have 24 hours before their batteries run out? So the operational relevance of that, building on the original field test studies, is really exciting. And the fact that we're collaborating with our Russian colleagues and we'll be able to take advantage of all the landings in that way. And you can't take advantage of SpaceX water landings because you then mess up the crew so much worse by bobbing them in the ocean that's a challenge. But at least we have these Boeing CST landings in the desert, which is a significant new opportunity. The third opportunity coming, and Chris will talk about this, I think, in a minute, is to do more autonomy studies, beginning with what are the software and hardware tools, and how do you set the crew for being able to care for themselves and medical events on orbit without the kind of ground support that we've gotten so used to today. And then ISS took it even one step further. They've reinstituted a comm delay capability. So over the coming year, we're going to start planning with ISS how to do possibly sessions up to 2 weeks that match the blackout periods you would have on Mars. Are there a set of things we could do in an autonomous phase on ISS? And could we also do operational simulations of comm delayed operations for periods of time? Now, right now, our experience with that is 2 hours. We've done 2-hour comm delay simulations on ISS before. It's a long way before you get to something that is simulating the isolation and confinement that we do, say, in Hera or NEK today. But we're working on a plan as to how you would get there, how you would build both the experience in flight operations on the ground as well as the experience of the crew. And when we were in Russia a couple weeks ago, we had this great panel with Kate Rubins and Yuri Malenchenko, who's now at GCTC, and Oleg Kotov, who's now at IBMP, and they talked to us about, and they really had a common message. They're, let us be autonomous, let us test this, let us do things in this new way, and you'll find we're actually able to do this much better than the ground thinks we are. And so we're really excited about those use cases. There are some more coming as well, but those are the 4 that have been accepted. Whether we can get autonomous periods to, say, 30 to 45 days, that is not accepted by ISS yet, because that has huge impacts on partner science and national lab science, so that's still forward work. But the fact that we're going to push that to a week over the next few years, I think, is also really exciting. So let me stop right there and let Chris pick it up.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Chris Lainart. I'm the element scientist for Exploration Medical Capability. That's the group in the human research program that tries to look at future medical system design. And as Julie mentioned, one of the things that we are very excited to be working on right now is trying to define better how a crew would be able to take care of themselves without significant ground support. And what we've learned in our 20 years on the ISS is how to take really good care of people in low Earth orbit. But unfortunately, that simply is going to be a different paradigm that we're going to have to adjust to for Mars missions. And so at the end of the day, the ISS is our best possible analog for studying how we're going to create autonomous capabilities for crews in the future. There are other opportunities coming forward about Gateway and lunar surface, but this panel is about ISS, so I'll focus on that. One of the things that we are working on right now, which we're excited about, is a software tool that is called AMOS. It's the Autonomous Medical Officer Software or Support Tool. And what that does is it's a procedure-based tool that's going to allow crews to perform medical procedures without ground support. And our intention is to do a test, a demonstration of this capability next spring or summer, if all goes according to plan, where we are actually going to take 2 crew members and tell them, you must perform a renal and bladder ultrasound. Here is the module that will help you to do that. No one is going to talk to you for the next 3 hours. Let's see how you do. We know it's going to be challenging. We know that there are going to be things that don't work. It may not be successful, but it's only by attempting to do it that we start to figure out where the problems lie. And we can then develop better tools, better training methods to prepare the crews to be able to do these kinds of functions independently. And our hope is that we're starting with something that is important to us, which is ultrasound, but our hope is to then take this technology and adapt it to other medical procedures. How well can the crew place IVs on their own without any ground support? How can they perform other medical procedures without medical support or ground support? It's not even necessarily just tied to medical. This is a space medicine summit, so that's why I'm talking about medical. But all of our operations are going to have to change. And the ground is going to have to be okay not knowing what's going on constantly and not giving the crew constant updates and information. And so our hope is that these types of demonstrations on ISS can continue to grow. And ultimately, what we would love to see is a 2-day autonomous medical simulation where the crew would be in a semi-autonomous fashion, so they would have ground support, but it would be with a significant time delay, and they would be responsible for performing a number of nominal medical operations, and then also go through a simulation of a medical emergency and see how well they perform without being able to speak to the ground in real time. And so that's our ultimate goal.
Thanks, Chris. And I think Sox and I are ready to do those urinary ultrasounds. We'll just have to draw straws to see who is the ultrasoner and who is the ultrasonee. With that, Bonnie, give us a few words here.
I'll keep it brief because I want to just address, I thank Julie very much for talking about the cooperative research on the 3 topics that we were asked to address. And I'm going to just briefly talk on the other 2 because for the last several years we've addressed them. I'm not certain that we've found a collective solution for them. And if I could summarize, it would be effective utilization of the station through sharing of facilities and sharing of crew time across the hatches, because we've heard that raised both on the research side and on the crew side for several years. There may be already a solution out there, but as we press forward with more and more demand on research time, I'd be very interested in knowing what kind of policies are maybe being developed now to allow that in the future.
Thanks, Bonnie. Mikhail was not able to come. We have Sergei, cosmonaut extraordinaire, over 2 years experience in space. Sergei, пожалуйста.
I'm not sure if everybody can hear me. Yes. I would like to draw your attention to this aspect. About 15 years ago, I was invited to a large conference in Delhi. That happens every year. It is called like struggle between civilization or unity of civilization. Various religious groups were there also, and political groups. They were discussing that question. That took 1 week, and one delegation from Slovakia came up to me. Those were diplomats, and they asked me a question as we were having a cup of coffee. They told me, "You are going to go to Mars. You will have some kind of international like a group there. What kind of society are you envisioning?" Most likely it will be military communism. What kind of political setup? And I told them, please come to any mission control in Moscow or in Houston or in Tokyo or in Europe and check it out. What kind of setup, what kind of society we have on ISS. Approximately a little bit earlier, as we were getting ready to explore ISS, U.S. astronauts came up to me with a proposal to join a group that would be preparing a special course for ISS participants. This is not for ultrasound. This is not for cardio research or any kind of medical setup. It's not for learning about stars. They called this program intercultural preparation. So we are in the same society, in the same volume on ISS. Different people of different backgrounds, different cultures, different histories. We speak different languages. However, we represent humanity. We represent people who live on Earth. In order to safely perform the mission that we have to have a different level of culture to make sure that we safely perform the task, our mission. This aspect, unfortunately, was not supported anywhere, not at NASA, not in Russia. The grant was not received. We were told the cosmonauts have a very trying a training program already. That is why they will adapt somehow by themselves to working with each other. And partially that does happen on Earth already. However, to be ready and quality setup for the long duration mission, so this kind of general common culture that needs to be addressed in cosmonaut training. I would like to stop here and give the word to the next speaker.
Thank you, Sergey. Alexei, пожалуйста.
Hello to everybody. It's a pleasure to see you again. Of course, we need to draw as much experience from the ISS as possible. But I would like to talk on behalf of the crew, because once we intensify our onboard research, we may overload the crew members. And as we can already see, the crews have to spend the time not only on research, but also on maintaining the ISS and also maintaining their health, performing spacewalks, docking, undocking, loading and unloading of cargo vehicles. And when we are trying to achieve as much scientific results as possible, we should not forget about the maintenance aspect. And I can assure you that crew surgeons, flight surgeons can tell you that when such operations are very intense, crew members often sacrifice their personal time and work through weekends to complete the research program. So I would like to say that we have to pay greater attention to the scheduling and to what research we want to have done during missions. We have to be picky, and we have to select experiments or research that would bring some clear and useful results. And of course, our scientists on the ground, when they prepare those research experiments, have to work more diligently on methodology so that our crews have good onboard procedures to be successful. Of course, we also need to provide our crews with good hardware, equipment for those research experiments. And the best experiment would be the one that can run on its own automatically without direct participation from a crew member. But the one-year mission to space experience where a Russian and a US crew member participated showed us that joint participation of international partners, of a Russian and NASA cosmonaut and astronaut, working together on a research experiment can provide us with much greater information and better results for both participating parties. And cross-research, when, for example, an astronaut is participating in a Russian research or a cosmonaut in US research, have also proven successful. There was another good idea voiced here when, for example, crew members would use IP's hardware and equipment for research. And I also want to point one more time that we need to take care of our crew members. They work hard, they overwork, and we need to make sure they stay healthy. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My dear colleagues. It's been 50 years, not too long, since we landed on the moon. We were just dreaming until just recently on how we could go to space. And it seemed to be an unreachable goal. But today, we have the International Space Station. It is a great research facility with various research projects and many positive results. Of course, the first missions were basically test missions of the hardware and equipment, but now we are gaining new knowledge, new experience of how hardware behaves on board and in space. And of course, it's all good, great and good that the ISS is a research facility, but we should never forget that it is not only for research, it's also for the crew members, for the humans on board. And I would like to point out that it's not just for research or for the crew members, it's for the humankind, for the benefit of the humankind. And I would like to say that the results that we get should be applicable on the ground too.
Dangerous proposition. I first want to remind people and connect us to reality that we have two people out doing a spacewalk right now. They are kicking butt. They're 25 minutes ahead of the timeline, And they're doing something really hard, really complex, one of the most demanding things we do, and they're making it look easy. So just think about our brothers and sisters there. I'm not the only one who knew Alexei Leonov. A lot of you knew him a lot better than I did, but I think he would love the idea that these guys are out there doing that right now as the first spacewalker. I want to just talk real quickly, overview about the concept of maximizing value of space station. How you assess that value is very individualistic and very dispersed when you're going to different audiences or different forums. For some, the commerce of use might be hours of utilization of crew time, which is one of the crew office favorites, and I say that very sarcastically. Another one is how many peer-reviewed papers get out, how many systems are tested, now how many CubeSats are launched. It's really quite amazing when you look at the various products that are out there, because really the diversity of that doesn't lend itself well to any one thread to try to assess how you maximize the value of the station. And that's okay. It really should be that way because the platform is that big and that complex. Now, from my little knothole as a medical dweeb, there's a lot we know about maintaining people in space and just the overall sustenance of a crew and the expectation that you're going to go there, you're going to be there for 6 months, and you're going to work really hard and really productively and come down in reasonably good shape. And we do that all the time now. And every day is different. It's not that you're repeating the same tasks every day so you're good at them. You have to synthesize new facts, new methods to look at diverse payloads throughout the day. And we do that. We do that really well. So I think it portends well that we're going to do really well in exploration venues. And I heard Chris say, we're going to try to figure out how the crew can be autonomous. Give us the tools, leave us alone, and we'll show you. No question. Now we need you guys. Make no mistake, because you have to give us those tools. I will give one point though. We have a highly risk-oriented research portfolio in the Human Research Program, and you must think that way. We know where the adverse effects are, and we try to study those the best we can. But consider this. We found a few years ago a really big thing that we had missed for decades, the neuro-ophthalmic syndrome, or whatever you want to call it. It's got 6 names in the literature. But this is intracranial pressure, optic disc edema, globe flattening, optic nerve sheath descent. It's a big, big deal. Now, it may not be that bad a thing because we still outlive the general population and do pretty well. But it's probably not a good thing, And I remember last year sitting here saying, what's going to be next? Well, we probably found the next thing. And I'm not going to steal thunder from coming panels here, but another darn thing that's a big thing that was right under our noses. Now, neither of these were found because of targeted risk-based research. These were serendipitous. We just happened to find them. And one of them found because of joint research we was doing, like Alexei described, using some Russian hardware, some US hardware. So it tells you that if we really go only human risk-based in our research approach, we may be missing things. We did. So what does that mean? Maybe we need to be doing more systems-based research. So we have this magnificent laboratory. It's staffed, it's equipped. We will never have another one like this. We may need to think about doing something a little bit more methodically based, system by system, to get a better picture of what the human really is like in space. And when you look at the literature, there are holes in our knowledge, and there are holes mostly because we think we don't get bitten there, but we don't know that yet. So, and I know what those holes are. A lot of you guys know what those holes are too, but I would suggest that we may need to rethink our research approach. And maybe, no kidding, we need to rewrite guidance physiology guidance textbook of physiology for spaceflight. I will close. I know we've got a few young people in here that, we've published biomedical results of Gemini and Apollo and Skylab, and just recently of the Space Shuttle program. And if the young people have not read those, that is your assignment. If the old people haven't read those, it's probably too late. You won't be able to apply them, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. So you all see this? This is how thick biomedical results of the International Space Station program is going to be when we're finished. There's a huge wealth of knowledge that's largely not compiled in one place, that's just scattered and cataloged and published into oblivion, but it's out there. And the composite picture is really amazing what we've learned. So that is your next assignment. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And students, Mike has given you a homework assignment at tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock. We need to make sure you've read all that. Elena, please give us a few words.
Thank you. I am glad that Julia has started this panel with mentioning the field test, because it's a great example of how the ISS can be used to prepare for deep space exploration and Mars missions. And we see that the recovery of the human body happens pretty fast. The sensomotoric part comes back within 24 hours. In a tent, we already see how human body recovers. However, if we do fly to Mars, then they would have to work within those first 24 hours. And the scenario becomes much more complex and complicated. And I think that we have already started preparing for the Mars mission with our field test idea. We are developing it even further. We are introducing the standard measures experiment, where we are actually introducing our results and our knowledge obtained through field tests. And we are evaluating the work capability and the health of the crew members once they land on Mars. So all countermeasures, despite all countermeasures, the challenges would be the same on Mars and in the now in zero-G environment. And as you have said already, during medical operations support, we are trying to develop countermeasures and physical training sessions ideas. We are asking engineers and math specialists to develop and to come up with ideas. But when you try and talking to those guys, it's like trying to go against the flow of the river. For example, think. So the moment you stop exercising on board, you are losing ground immediately. You're not staying in one spot. If you stop rowing against the flow of the river, it takes you back immediately. We've already had this experience, and the same situation stands true for physical exercises in space. For example, we had 2 crew members who could not perform their physical exercises, and I suggested to them just to test, to substitute physical training with some other measures and to compensate physical exercises with some other devices. One of the crew members who was on board the ISS just said, "Nope, never. I tested it myself. If you stop exercising for just a little bit, you lose shape, you lose stamina. Within just a few days, and due to force majeure situation, they had to stop exercising for some time, and they had a very bad experience. So now I want to say that we have the opportunity of conducting medical research on board, and during the previous panel, we really liked the saying that you gave us. That we
open
if we want
the
to
floor
go
for questions.
long, we need to go
actually
together.
have a half hour before lunch, so that's a fair amount of time to entertain questions from you all, and we could sit here and discuss them in the panel. So microphones, question, grab a mic and ask away.
I guess this question's for you, Mike, but possibly any of the panel. So in many areas of science, the changes that have occurred in the last 20 or 30 years go from assuming all animals in a given species or all humans are the same. and there's no difference. And you just give some sort of a countermeasure or something. What we now know is there are huge phenotypic differential vulnerabilities, and they appear to be intractable in many cases, so that it pushes you back to selection over trying to use countermeasures. I've often wondered whether NASA is focusing clearly on the degree of differential vulnerability among astronauts in the spaceflight stressor conditions, and whether the interclass correlations that you get from looking at people repeatedly tell you there is a trait or likely gene basis for that. But are you going there at all, or are you staying away from that and just hoping that training and psychosocial models will take care of everything?
I mean, well, the easy answer up front is that we don't know enough to act on yet. So this is a time to let the debate rage and go get the data. And so we're doing that. But I would also kind of put out that NASA's charter, informally, is more to open the space frontier and widen the envelope, not tighten the envelope. So we want technical solutions. We want to fly informed, but we don't want to fly exclusive. But you do bring up an interesting point, in that some of you may have seen a study that was published comparing 5 Chinese taikonauts against 5 ESA astronauts, and showed a vastly different post-flight orthostatic response. A highly significant response. So it's not just inter-subject variability. There may be some cultural, racial, training. There's a lot of things that we don't know. So we take that as a point of interest, not that Chinese may be more superior to their European counterparts, because they had much less response. But boy, let's go find out why.
And if I could just add, the collection of omics measures is definitely part of the plan for the Human Research Program. And what that opens up, in the way that Mike said, is the ability to start using personalized medicine to tailor your countermeasures to meet any particular decrement that one individual's phenotype might offer. So it's not about figuring out who you rule out, it's figuring out how to properly care for the people that you need to fly.
I just add an anecdote. So I work in the area often of sleep deprivation, et cetera. And for years we've done hundreds and hundreds of studies on different types of sleep deprivation and amount, restricting sleep. And we just assumed that there were some differences in there, but everybody got impaired. But we knew the standard deviations were getting larger and larger as we added more people. And then we made the terrible mistake of running the same people twice, checking them again for the phenotype, and the interclass correlations are hugely high. In other words, it's like a fingerprint, your vulnerability, and worse than that, some people are very vulnerable, but to everyone's horror, when I finally revealed it, there are people that don't have any serious response to sleep loss. In other words, they can keep going. Now, in the culture, people talk about that. They'll say, I don't suffer what other people are suffering. Or I don't experience that with this stressor or that. But those phenotypes are in there. We don't necessarily understand them or the biology, but when they're stable over time and you get high ICCs, that tells you maybe that's one way of trying to identify who could tolerate certain kinds of things in spaceflight. It may relate to radiation, or it may relate to confinement or other conditions. But it's a heavy lift, but on the other, and I know it's sort of anti-American to suggest that people might be biologically different to the point where some would be selected and not others, but the hell with the democracy, okay? Let's pick the best people to go to Mars, okay? Let's pick the ones that can handle it.
Well, then let me ask you a question then. Again, I think we need to go get the data and do it in a non-threatening way. But a question that I posed to the sleep community, not you, when we were looking at the sleep quantity on board and finding out that it was maybe 20 minutes a night less than normally on the ground, why do we assume that the sleep requirement is the same in flight as on the ground? I mean, it's a constellation of changes. Every bloody system changes. We know the CNS is not the same. Why do we make that tacit assumption, especially knowing that performance throughout the day in general is pretty much not impaired?
Yeah, we shouldn't make the assumption, Mike. I mean, you're
Thank
spot
you.
on right. Yeah, absolutely. We should go with what the evidence shows, and that's that. And don't try to explain it away with some previous theories or something. It's just really identifying where the predictable variance is and how do we optimize it.
You know, I would like to say that if we do select crew members, we have to take into consideration psychological factors. For example, we would like to have quick-minded and sharp people. For example, we have Sergei Avdeyev, a participant of a one-year mission. He did not have a name tag, and he just grabbed his own badge and used it. That's quick-mindedness, thinking quick on the feet. Of course, there are different stressors during a space mission, so it's really hard to select who would be the best. So I think it's going to be really hard to select that correct genome that would be able to withstand all those stress factors. It has to be maybe a superhuman.
I want to second the concerns of on the previous concerns about the variability of our subjects. Huge variability, and it's not in it's in every aspect of human health, psychosocial, sleep, as well as very somatic conditions, very physical disease conditions that we see. And the risks we identify based on several single-digit % of the crew that suffers a certain pathological development makes me think that all the attempts to just see enough subjects to be able to figure it out are sometimes even doomed before we start that prospective experiment, because it's only a matter of luck whether one of our 10, 15 people that we will involve in one experiment will express that particular condition. It's a problem with us, and we know there is a problem, and we will continue having this problem. Say even the one-year missions that we're planning to see more one-year outcomes are going to be just a handful. And who knows whether any of those individuals will express the worst concerns that we want to figure out. So I guess the answer is in genetics and in ground studies, and in better review of terrestrial literature, which is holding a lot of answers that we missed to identify.
Any more questions? Oh. It'd be a shame to end early and get to lunch early.
Sorry. So I was at a very different conference a couple of months ago, and the discussion there centered around optimizing the space station for commercial use and commercial applications. So my question is, how are these two very different goals going to be balanced?
So that is actually a big challenge, because the way that you optimize for commercial is you let people propose things very late in the flow, launch them quickly. Maybe their procedures aren't the most mature things ever. One of the things we've done is let the PIs get on the phone with the crew members, talk them through it. You fail early, you fail quickly. You do all kinds of things to be commercially friendly to research and development that are the exact opposite of what you do on an exploration mission, where the crew members are going to be doing something really dangerous for the first time in human history, for example. So fortunately, we do have some guidance, because we have the guidance in the law that kind of says 50% of the U.S. capabilities on the space station are for commercialization and 50% are for exploration research. So we can divide our resources in that way. We also have our collaboration with our international partners, so and the allocations for them and the ability to do experiments together. So across that, we really do have the ability to optimize both. And that's one of the reasons why, as I talk about autonomous periods of operations, in that 2-week period, there's a lot of exploration research and exploration type activities that would want to be in that autonomous period. There are also probably a number of ISS National Lab users that will want nothing to do with that period. But if it's only 2 weeks, they can just wait and do the next 2 weeks. So the fact that we have worked so hard to bridge and have like as Bonnie asked about, processes in place for Russians and Americans to do research jointly, to share crew time. We've had huge successes in that area over the last 4 to 5 years. So the fact that we can do joint research where it makes sense, that we can do commercial research where it makes sense, that's really something that is a great success of ISS. It won't be the same as we go to lunar missions where the resources are going to be very, very limited. I think we're going to be really framed in with a much more finite set of activities. But the beauty is by having low Earth orbit and the lunar enterprise at the same time, you can actually optimize even between those two platforms. So you may do something to prove that a particular technology is good for a year for future exploration to Mars, and then you may fly just one little component of that to just double check in the lunar enterprise that it's okay with deep space radiation. So you can combine ISS and lunar work together and really optimize your resources across all of those different kinds of goals.
Let me add one aspect of the commercialization that we've currently stumbled across on station. And this has to do with the proprietary nature of not only the data, but the way the experiments are conducted. And we found that there might be bio company A and bio company B, and sitting on console, bio company B can read the crew procedures for bio company A, and there could be proprietary information in there just in terms of how you mix the components together to do your experiment. And the two companies don't want each other to see what the other company is doing when you're on a platform with 6 people on that you can, everybody's supposed to be an interchangeable unit. And then all the people at mission control that can pull up the procedures. And so now NASA is trying to fix the levels of security at mission control where you have this general timeline and only the people that need to be able to open up a procedure and read it can open up and read that procedure. So there's mechanical issues there, mechanical computer issues of just how do you handle the proprietary nature that is needed when you're opening your platform for commercial uses. Jeff.
Yeah, also following up on commercial, NASA recently in talking about opening up the station for commercial activities, brought up the idea of more tourists going up, $35,000 a night. I wonder if anybody would like to comment on how that might impact a lot of the other uses that we'd like to get out of Space Station.
So that also specifically bounded the most limited resource, which is crew time. So that particular opportunity said there would only be 5% of the U.S. allocation of crew time dedicated to that service that could be requested by those providers. So we focus on crew time not because it's the best measure of what you accomplished, but because it's the most limited resource. And that's the one where, as we have established the national lab, as we do other kinds of non-R&D based commercial developments where we're very, very careful, and we, of course, work with our congressional stakeholders to make sure that everybody has an agreement about the way that we go forward with those limited resources.
John.
This may also be, it's in the same topic when it may be for Julie or Chris, but one flavor of this commercial aspect, I mean, the two questions have related to the use of station or the use of companies on the station and so on. But the technologies that are being developed on the station for a sustainable human presence are essentially sustainable technologies, water reclamation, power usage, all these different things. There are technologies being developed by companies and universities that can help that, and you're very aware of that. But there's also the spin out in that there's a need for these technologies on planet Earth for many, many different causes. So how is that a factor? How does that come into play in your planning for the commercial aspect? Because that bridges the purely commercial use with NASA's development of technologies. How do you it's 50-50, but how do you cross that that combination when you're thinking of spinning out technologies or spinning in for these specific purposes?
Yeah, that was actually really well said. What's interesting is in science and in technology, you never know what the final beneficial end use is going to be when you innovate. So you may see an exploration application of a piece of research, or you may see an Earth-based application of a piece of research. So far, my experience on the space station is whatever people start with when they fly that first piece of research, it can wind up in either place, and I don't think it's predictable at all. So I think of some of the early work that was done thinking about microbes that might make the crew sick, crossed over and turned into very different kinds of commercial-based research on cell culture and possibility of looking at using microgravity and the way that that affects cells in ways that would help address disease on Earth. That was kind of surprising. That wasn't where it was expected to go. Similarly, when we do, as commercial providers are starting to think about how they would operate independently in low Earth orbit after ISS is gone, they can look at how do they leverage ISS today, how do they leverage the NASA-funded technologies, how do they leverage other technologies, and they wind up becoming kind of an innovation area. They spin off technologies in different ways than NASA spins them off. So you actually wind up with water purification solutions. Some of them are NASA's and they get deployed in disaster regions. Some of them wind up never touching NASA anymore, but they're driven by an exploration effort overall. So I think the intersection that I see is at its core of why we became scientists and engineers in the first place. Because if you go to try and solve a problem, you never know what kind of really amazing solutions will come out of your solution and then how it will get reused by others. And that's why space exploration is such an important economic benefit for all of our countries as we work together.
So I think the microphone, I think that's where it relates to the first panel for the argument about why should we be doing this. I think we need to make, the argument related to the first part of why we should be doing this is NASA used to always say none of the dollars that you give to NASA are spent in space, it's all spent on the Earth. But it's the same sort of thing. I think that the argument needs to be made that it's technological solutions to human problems, and therefore there's maybe 6 astronauts on the space station, 6 people on the space station, but there's 7 billion people on the planet that can benefit from not even what NASA's doing directly, but the questions that NASA are asking in the low resource environment in which they have to be applied. I think that has a great boon to the nation and all nations in terms of technology development, inspiring students and so on. So I think that's a real argument that needs to be more strongly made, I believe.
Bonnie.
Yeah, I'll be real respectful of the time here, but it just occurred to me, we talk about maximizing the use of International Space Station, and of course it is a test bed for future exploration. We will always need a LEO capability that we can go back and forth to, whether it's testing new technologies for life support systems or whatever. We're going to always need a footprint there. I think that from a commercial point of view, that there needs to be some stability. I started with the Space Shuttle program, and we built up the mid-deck experiments. It's how we started protein crystal growth. We brought in the pharmaceutical companies, and then we started getting a rhythm going. And you could send your hardware up and back very easily in a short mission, and you could iterate that experiment. And that was true for a lot of us working in the life sciences as well. Station, it's up there, and it better work, because you're either not going to get it back for a while. You can't afford to experiment. And when NASA, I'll put my NASA hat on, when we terminated the KC-135 program, the university program, which would fly 100 universities every summer, we also impacted that ability to do R&D and to have failures early on the ground rather than failures in orbit. And I think you have to have a holistic look at this. If you really want to be successful on the station for a commercial company, there needs to be ways to experience that environment in short periods, whether it's KC-135 in some cases, or even some short sorties on something else, and to reduce the risk of finally putting something up there. And then finally, have some longer range vision rather than we, the government, saying, well, we're going to shut you down in 4 years. No investor wants to hear that. That's very hard for a startup. You've got to have a long-range vision. It's like saying, build the airplane, but I'm not sure your airport's going to be open in 5 years.
Hi, I'm Mike Coburn. I'm the urology department chair at Baylor across the street.
Socks and I are ready.
Yeah. So I was very interested in the renal and bladder ultrasound discussion and in Chris's description of the AMOS program. And I'm curious as to what the relevance of utilization of simulator capability and actual involvement in surgical activities here that the medical center could provide to potential crew or current crew, and what sorts of simulation or practice activities for both diagnostic and interventional procedures might be able to be conducted on the space station in preparation for longer duration flights. I mean, it's one thing to be able to put an ultrasound unit on someone and find that they've got hydronephrosis and an obstructing ureteral stone, but if you're halfway to Mars, what do you do about it? Those are procedures that can be taught with endoscopic simulation capabilities, and we would be very excited in the medical center to be able to provide that sort of simulation experience.
That sounds great.
That also sounds like a Mike Barrett question.
Well, I would just say we've been noodling on that for decades, even to the point of doing parabolic flight studies with animal models and doing actually some of these procedures. A urologist you may know has actually done ureteral stents in animal models in parabolic flight. It really becomes a question of trades and what risk are you going to accept? How much stuff are you going to carry? If you carry a full endoscopic suite, what are you not carrying? Redundant ECLIS system, for instance. And so these are the kinds of things that keep the program managers up at night for long periods of time.
And I've got an additional story to that. When we were looking at Lunar Lander, this was back in the mid-2000, they wanted an AED on board. And then there had to be a backup AED in case the main AED failed. And I pointed out we really needed 4 AEDs on board, because with the crew of 4 sitting there and you push the button for ascent off the moon, if the engine don't light, you're gonna have 4 simultaneous heart attacks.
One follow-up to what I was saying is that, as we make those trades, it doesn't mean we don't follow these lines of thinking. So our job is to come up with whatever simulations, hardware, whatever new technology, we keep abreast of medical procedures and whatnot, so that you have the best set of toolbox to offer a program manager from which to make those trades. So just because we're worried that we may or may not do it doesn't mean we don't develop those. And actually, surgical procedures, I would almost say, well, we've got one of our premier spaceflight surgery experts, Dr. Campbell, up here. We've probably gone way beyond thinking about what we'll ever be able to actually fly. And that's where you want to be.
And if I could, I'll just follow up very quickly as well. The need to test procedures on the ground and in analogs is critically important, because especially for exploration missions, as we're trying to define what a system might look like, mass and volume and the other resource constraints that we have right now in spaceflight are difficult, but once you start looking at exploration, they become almost impossible. And the last thing we want to do is recommend anything in a medical system design that either has no real use or the people on board can't actually use. Because at that point, you're just flying a brick and you're wasting mass that could have been used for something better. So the ability to verify and validate a medical system on the ground and in analogs for exploration before we actually go is critically important.
Yeah.
I was very encouraged to hear about this push for testing autonomy, both for crews and systems. I'm wondering if there's any plan to test autonomy during and after landing, as of course that will be a huge challenge when after long duration spaceflight, landing on another planet.
Yeah, so we've been having those conversations because there's a big suite of what you could do. We have what we did with our Russian colleagues in field tests, which was really focused on characterizing the basic sensory motor impacts. Now what we're talking about is moving towards something that's much more operationally relevant and adding some components of autonomy, but our key questions are still, what could the crew do that would address major mission challenges that could happen in the first 24 to 48 hours? So as part of that, what we're talking about is maybe the first 4 tests would be focused on, could they do a robotic activity to connect to power? Could they do an EVA as a third chain kind of contingency activity with some fairly tight limitations on how you would test that. But we would also like, once we have that set of data, then you can really imagine a second set of studies that you would want to do where you could make the mission even more operationally relevant and really see, could we have the crew land and do nothing other than what they can do for themselves. But right now, I would say we don't have enough data to define that mission properly because we still have so few subjects and so much variability across those subjects. So some of the predictive work to define, shall we say, a full landing simulation at a future point in time, I think this interim stage that we're calling kind of field test 2 really helps you get to that point, but it takes a couple of phases to get to a full autonomy simulation.
We've got 4 minutes left. Time for another question. Yes.
Hi. So I'm currently an undergraduate student, so I don't have too much depth of knowledge here, which kind of leads into my question. So whenever you are sending these astronauts and cosmonauts out on these, or planning to send them out on like missions that are years long, for example, like going to Mars, is it worth considering the trade-off between having more experienced astronauts who may be older or younger ones who might be able to survive the extreme conditions better given like their younger status in life, like maybe being healthier or something like that?
Older is better.
I second that.
So first of all, don't feel at all inhibited in asking questions. In fact, if anything, the younger people here should be the most empowered in asking questions because you keep us on the ball. The rest of us are so set in our ways that, again, we're beyond hope. There's trades everywhere, right? So if you're talking deep space crews, there's lots of radiation, biological effectivity. The more old and the more guy you are, the more radiation hardened you are. So that's part of the trade. But there's certain medical conditions that go up statistically when you're older, and you're at higher risk that way. That's part of the trade. But what you really want is a mission architecture and an envelope that accommodates all of those things. You want to be able to send a diverse crew because really what keeps people alive is head work and teamwork once you get past the basic skill set. So yes, there are selection factors like that, but mostly those drive you to build a mission architecture that accommodates a diverse team of explorers that could really get the job done.
I just wanted to add that we compared how fast experienced cosmonauts would readapt compared to the new ones. And it turns out that those who are experienced had shorter period of readaptation. So it's very important to really find a balance or a compromise to send somebody who is really young but experienced. Well, and remember that it will be a limited number of people who will fly into this long duration flight or long duration mission, and they have to get along, and considering that they will all represent different cultures, different nations. They may have their own traditions, different ways of doing things. So we have to really account for psychological load that they will experience as well.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. John Charles.
Yeah, Don, thanks very much. This is a quick one. Maybe you and Mike can address this as a way of framing some of the discussions we've had and we will have. Can you remind us what the gear ratios are for a kilogram on orbit or on the moon or in lunar orbit versus what that kilogram would cost on the ground as a way of deciding whether we really want to carry a full urology suite or something like that to the moon?
Okay, the Saturn V could put about 120 metric tons into low Earth orbit, about 50 metric tons into orbit around the moon, and I believe the Apollo lunar lander weighed about 18 tons. And it could deliver about 500 kilograms of payload to the moon. So that kind of gives you, and I think the Saturn V stack, and Walt could probably tell me, I think it was around 7 to 8 million pounds sitting on the launch pad. So you it costs you a lot to put kilograms on the surface of the moon. It doesn't cost as much to put it into low Earth orbit, but it still costs you. With that, it is 11:45 and 45 seconds. Let's call it a morning.